welcome everybody. We're getting a couple more people coming in here, but we're going to start right on time so we can get right to Karrah. I want to thank everyone for joining NEWA's Empowerment Series. And this is a great series for us to talk to great women about their challenges, what's on their mind, how they've overcome obstacles, and what is driving them. So this is, to infuse you with, some great energy and be able to network with other people within our organization. We're going to have everyone muted, but muted for the entire program until the end for Q&A. So you will be able to ask Karrah Q&A. How do you do that? You can put it in your chat. If you're on Facebook, you can type it into Facebook, and we'll get those questions right over to Karrah. We're going to ask you to turn your cameras off while Karrah is speaking, because we are recording this. And then when we come back on for Q&A, you can all turn it back on and we can talk to each other. And we're going to get to as many questions as we can, because Karrah is encouraging questions. We do record this program, and it will be on our YouTube channel probably a couple weeks after the live event. At the end of this program, you're going to get a survey that will take you no more than 10 seconds to fill out. So we really appreciate it if you would fill out that survey for us. Our disclaimer is that the views and opinions of our speaker is theirs, blah, blah, blah. They're not of NEWA's, so you know the disclaimer. NEWA, for all of you that do not know, is the leading organization of women and for professional development here in Northwest Indiana. So we focus on providing professional growth through networking, education, and leadership support throughout Northwest Indiana. If you'd like to join, newa.org, please go ahead and join, and you get lots of great benefits by joining. We have our partners that partner with us throughout the year that are instrumental in bringing these programs to us. Our elite partners are Franciscan Health and Ivy Tech Community College. Our premier partner is Horizon Bank, and our diamond partner is Sage Popovich. So thank you very much for that. So I'd like to introduce you to Karrah Herring. Karrah has been recently named by South Bend's Regional Chamber of Commerce as the 2021 Woman of Influence. So way to go there, Karrah. She is passionate about gender issues, specifically the intersection of race and gender, and the experiences of Black women in higher education, corporate culture, and religion in 2020. Karrah authored a book on these very issues titled Boobs and Brown Skin. On November 19th of last year, Governor Holcomb announced his appointment of Karrah to his cabinet of Indiana's first ever Chief Equity, Inclusion, and Opportunity Officer for the state. So way to go, Governor. She assumed this position just this month, and she's speaking to us for the very first time, so we're super excited. With this, Karrah, I'm going to pass it right on over to you.
Thank you so much. I am just elated to be with you all today. Andrea talked a little bit about my background with women's advocacy. It is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, obviously as a woman, but also as someone who had the opportunity to oversee these initiatives, a lot of equity initiatives for the University of Notre Dame for a long time. And now I've been blessed with this amazing opportunity to join Governor Holcomb's team down here in Indianapolis at the State House to look at equity, inclusion, and opportunity across the state. So today, I'm so grateful for Stephanie for reaching out to me and asking me to be part of this series. And I shared a title with her for this talk. And it's titled When Women Unite, Intersectionality, Allyship, and Purposeful Connection. And I just want to talk a little bit about my journey and how I've gotten to where I am because of the power of uniting with other women. Even in 2021, we are still having conversations around pay equity, unfortunately, and looking at the wage gap that exists. And if you look at the data right now, it shows that, white women, for instance, still are only at about 79 cents to the dollar of what their male counterparts make. That number is even lower for a Black or African-American women, which sits at about 64 cents to the dollar. And then if you look at Hispanic or Latinx women, that number is even lower, and that's at about 58%. And then when you start to think about Indigenous or Native American women, the average is about 60% on the dollar to men, but then that drastically changes when you start to look by tribe. The disparities are even more at play. And then not only thinking about race, but thinking about age, right? Because we are not a monolith, women. We are a lot of different ages across many different races and backgrounds, but the pay gap when it comes to age, when you think about early on in your career, it's actually pretty small. There's only about a 6 or 7% pay gap for people that are working in their 20s towards their late 20s. And then that number starts to drastically increase. And by the time we get to around 65 years or older, that number has increased by probably about 15% more. And so it's amazing to watch how that pay gap increases over the course of our careers. So there's so many reasons why it is critical for us to unite. Thinking about CEOs with Fortune 500 companies, and if you look at the numbers today, only about 7% of the Fortune 500 company CEOs are females. And that's around 35, 36 women that are actually leading these companies. And if you add, race to that number would obviously drop significantly. If you add LGBTQIA to that number would drop or be non-existent. And so there's so many different layers to how we have to advocate for ourselves and one another as women. I was looking at some of the statistics around college university presidents and chancellors who run colleges and universities, and that number is less than 30% of presidents or chancellors who oversee a college or university. Less than 30% are women. You think about the NCAA. I was big advocate for Title IX as I oversaw some of that work when I was at the University of Notre Dame. Women are increasingly playing sports at higher rates, but less than 40% of those sports are coached by females. And so it's important to understand that while we have accomplished so much in 2021, these conversations are still so critical. So what is intersectionality? When I talk about women uniting, I always start the conversation off to discuss a little bit about intersectionality. And so I'll read a definition to you, very short definition. It really means the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to an individual or group, and regarded as creating an overlapping or interdependent system of discrimination or oppression. So I'll give you an example. If I'm in an organization and I'm already kind of grappling with the challenges that I face being a woman in a corporate culture where there are very few of us, and then you add my race to that, and then maybe add my religious diversity to that, or any other types of diversity as a mother or a single mother or a married woman. There's so many layers to us as women that when we start to talk about equity in the workplace or equity in education, equity across the board, we have to always take into account that it's deeper than just gender. There are a lot of different people that fall into various categories. And so as we start to advocate for one another, that intersection is really important. Andrea mentioned my book. It's called Boobs and Brown Skin, which is a bit of a provocative title, but the reason I chose that title is I was having a conversation with a few of my friends at Notre Dame a few years ago, one of which who was the associate head women's basketball coach for Notre Dame women's basketball. Her name is Carol Owens. And we were talking about the challenges that we were facing as women in our respective fields of expertise. So I was working in compliance in the Department of Human Resources on the senior leadership team for human resources at Notre Dame. And she was coaching at the time for Muffet McGraw, who's one of my favorite women leaders across the board. She is just such an advocate for women and people of color. And so Coach Owens was working for Muffet at the time, and we were talking about Muffet's stance on a lot of issues around equity. And I said, it's amazing that we were having to grapple with all of these issues related to being a woman and then being a woman of color. It's like, can we ever get a break because of our boobs and brown skin? And so we were jokingly talking about that. And I said, boobs and brown skin, that really represents the challenges from a gender perspective and then the race perspective. I said, it's a very catchy title. Maybe I'll use that for my book one day. I decided to use it. I released the book last June, and so they mentioned it. And so what I talk about in this book is really the journey that I had to take getting comfortable finding my voice. So oftentimes I was in meetings with people, very senior level meetings with vice presidents and deans, talking about our workplace culture, talking about looking to increase opportunities for women, people of color, veterans, individuals with disabilities, looking to increase opportunities for the LGBTQIA. And so as we were talking in those meetings, I would look around and I would realize that I was oftentimes one of very few women, and certainly one of a few, or usually the only woman of color in the room. And there were times where I was extremely uncomfortable speaking up and saying, like, listen, we have to look at pay equity. We need to do a pay equity study with an outside party. We need to look at equity across race and gender. And it was challenging for me in those moments to find my voice sometimes, to speak up and say, there's a bigger picture here. It's not just about the bottom line. We really have to think more broadly about workforce engagement. And it took some time to do that. And there's a huge journey of introspection that I went through around how do I speak up in a way that doesn't seem too aggressive for women. And we can talk about that in a whole different, series where women have to be very cognizant of how we word things and the tone that we use and our body language and all of that. And so the book talks about that journey and just coming to a place where I was very comfortable with my authentic self. And I found a way to communicate sometimes controversial, which they shouldn't be controversial topics around equity, tense conversations that had to happen when I was calling the organization out for trying to replicate what I think our society should look like. And I was able to find my voice through some very interesting techniques. And then the book also shares some of the stories of, for instance, my friend, Coach Carol Owens, who was a part of that conversation initially. She has a chapter in the book, as does my mother and a few other of my friends in different fields, one of whom is Beyonce's drummer. She actually has a chapter in the book sharing her experience with the music industry and entertainment industry. But I said all that to say this: when we think about intersectionality, it's so important, especially white women, to think in terms of, yes, I have these issues that are impacting me as a white woman in corporate culture or education or religion, but I have my sisters on the other end of the melanin spectrum that I should be thinking about as well, because sometimes their voice is suppressed even more because of that complexity of race added to their gender, or my sisters that are on the other end of the LGBTQIA spectrum and what that looks like for them and how their voice could be suppressed even more. So I think it's really important that as we start to think about issues around pay equity and we think about issues around movement and organizations and shattering glass ceilings, that we think about all of the different layers of identity that are involved with that. The second piece that I highlighted was allyship, because as we start to think about these issues, it's so important that when one of us has a seat at the table or one of us has a voice at the table, that we keep all of that pocketed in the back of our minds, so that as we're talking about opportunities for promotional development within our organizations, we're looking at talent management and having conversations about how we're moving talent throughout the organization or how we're creating opportunities within the organization. If one of us gets that seat at the table and we have that voice at the table, we have an obligation, I believe, based on the statistics that have shown that we're still trying to close that gap and we're still trying to see more women leaders as CEOs and CFOs and COOs. I believe we have an obligation to really speak up for our sisters from across the board. And so allyship is just going to be so critical as we're looking at equity moving into 2021 and beyond. And then the third piece is purposeful connections, purposeful engagement. One of the things that has really helped me in my career, and I will say this until I can't say it, until I'm blue in the face, is connecting with other women of a like mind who say, you know what, we have some really unique qualities and skills that we can bring into the workplace or bring into the educational setting. How can we unite together and look at how we can capitalize on those unique things to get the attention of the people making the decisions at the top if it's not us? And so one of my most cherished relationships is my mentor. Her name is Terry Lynn Devenish, and she is the Chief Operating Officer for Aeon Canada. So Aeon is like a consulting firm that some of you may be familiar with. And she was in the Chicago location for quite some time, representing compliance for North America. And then she was promoted over to the COO position not too long ago. And she's from Canada, so she was able to go back to Toronto. But Terry and I met through a male colleague that I met at a conference and said, you know, you remind me of one of my colleagues. Would you be interested in talking with her? Not saying that you need a mentor, but she might be someone that you're interested in talking with. And at the time, I had been praying and asking God to really connect me with women that could help me on my journey. And Terry showed up. And Terry and I started off by having a bi-weekly hour call on Thursdays when I was with Notre Dame. And we would just talk about the challenges that I was running into. We would talk about, you know, her journey and the things that we actually found out were very similar. Some of the things that I was grappling with were similar to things that she had overcome in the workplace. And so that bi-weekly call over the course of 2 years eventually turned into a monthly, and we kind of were able to slow it down. But we met up in person on a number of occasions, and she gave me feedback. She would share documents with me if she knew I was working on a particular initiative that was brand new to my organization, and perhaps it was something she had already done. Instead of having to recreate the will, she would give me a blueprint or a framework to work from. If I knew I was going into a tense conversation in a meeting that I had to go in, and maybe I was going to be terminating someone because of the compliance work, and there was some type of infraction that had taken place, she'd been there, she'd done that. She would talk me through kind of what that would look like and how I could really create a conversation that wouldn't be so tense and upsetting. She would talk to me about advocating for myself and advocating for salary and promotion. And she was just a wealth of resources for me. And in turn, I have been mentoring other young women coming through the ranks as young professionals and people of color. And so I talk about that purposeful connection, purposeful unification, because when we do that, it not only feels good because we can share our story. It's a bit of a therapy session, right? When you're talking about what you've been through, but it creates such a great momentum for the women coming behind you to know that you've been there. You've accomplished so much. You got past those impediments that may have been in front of you. I can do the same thing. And there's so much power in that purposeful connection and helping move other women through the organization. And so I would say when I think about women uniting and just girl power and advocating for one another, when we take that intersectionality into consideration, when we have that seat at the table, we know that we're advocating for more than just ourselves and more than just women that look like us. I had someone ask me, you know, when you start to build out your office, is it going to be diverse? And I thought, well, shouldn't anyone who's hiring think about diversity in their hiring? No one should hire people that look exactly like them or think exactly like them. I shouldn't be held to that standard just because I'm the person doing equity, inclusion, and opportunity work. We should all be thinking like that. And so that intersectionality, keeping that in the back of our minds when we have those opportunities is key. And then second, the allyship. We are all here to support one another, to understand that our journeys may look very different, but if we can just find empathy and really try to understand where we come from and the experiences that we have. My experience as a Black woman going to Purdue and then going to law school at Valparaiso, and then moving into higher education and now moving into government work, my experience as a Black woman may look very different than someone who's Latinx or a white woman's experience. But it doesn't mean that we can't have empathy and understand one another's experiences better so that we can advocate for one another. And then that final piece, the purposeful connection. We have to do more of that, really reaching out to mentor, or not even mentor young professionals, but connect laterally across our professions to someone who may be in a similar role so you can bounce ideas off of one another and to know that you're not alone in this journey that we're on. So those three things are critical, and I will advocate for them until the Lord takes me on home to be with him. I will advocate for those items because I really believe that when women unite and we think about those things intentionally, there's nothing that we cannot do. We have a woman at one of the highest seats in the country as Vice President of the United States, and a woman of color at that. It's just phenomenal to see how far we've come, but there's so much more territory for us to take over. And I think that we will get there with organizations like this and conversations like this. So that's all I had to share. That was the extent of what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to leave plenty of time for not only questions, but because we are a group of women talking about these really interesting issues, commentary as well for anything that you may have grappled with and how you've overcome some of those things. So that's what I have. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, Karrah, thank you. And I'm glad that you are leaving us with time for questions, because we do have questions for you. We already had some that are coming in. Awesome. And Jen, thank you. It's a great great presentation, and I agree. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is when you talk about purposeful connection. We've heard in the last, 3 presentations that we have about purposeful connection. And I think there's a lot of people who want to have it, but they don't know how to get it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What would your recommendation be for someone who doesn't know? I mean, how does someone even start to get purposeful connection?
It can feel so overwhelming, especially if you're in a very large organization, or even if you're in a very small organization, you don't have women or people in that organization that you could necessarily connect to. One of the things that I do, and I'm very deliberate about this, is even when I was about to start here with Governor Holcomb's team, I went into research. Who are the women that are already there, and what type of work have they done? Where are their bios at? And interestingly enough, you all have our Lieutenant Governor, Suzanne Crouch. You're going to be hearing from her soon. And she called me at least 3 times before I ever even started in the role. Number one, to welcome me and to just kind of share some information. Interestingly enough, I've been here for almost a month and we haven't seen each other in person. We're in the same, we're floors apart and we still haven't seen one another in person. But she was very deliberate about making sure that I felt comfortable coming in. But what I had done was I looked to see who the women were. And I put it on my list that, okay, I'm going to find a way to reach out to some of these women and ask them for coffee. I'm going to find a way to reach out to some of these women just so I can do an introductory meeting to learn about them. And not everyone you sit down with, not everyone you'll find a connection with and want to continue those conversations. But when you do that, when you actually are very deliberate in looking and researching women that you think may be interesting and reaching out to them, you'll be surprised at how many women are like, yes, let's have coffee. Let's talk about our shared experiences. So it takes a little bit of work on the front end sometimes to do that research and see who's out there in your region, in your city, in the businesses that are there. But when you do that, you can often find someone of maybe the 5 or 6 that you reach out to that could be a lasting connection for you. So there's a little work on the front end, but it will always be worth it if you take the time to do it.
Yeah. That's perfect. And of course, you can connect through NEWA. I mean, just plug
Absolutely.
that.
Plug that. Plug that.
Okay. So Governor Holcomb had this idea of this position. How did that come about? Why?
So yes, so the same exact question that I asked. So when I was contacted about my potential interest in this role, I was pregnant and very comfortable in my position with the University of Notre Dame, a really great work-life balance. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to have them put my name in the hat. But on August 18th, he did a press conference and he talked about, and this was the State of Equity address that he did on August 18th. And you can actually Google this, it's still available on YouTube. He talked about the situation that happened last summer with George Floyd in Minnesota, the gentleman who was killed by the police up there in Minnesota. And he talked about watching that and then watching the conversations around race and equity that were happening after that. And he said he started to question some of his own perspectives around race and equity. And so as he started to think through some of this, he decided, and this is no shock to me once I got to know Governor Holcomb, that Indiana could really be a leader on this. And he decided to put together a racial equity task force council here within the State House of some of his most senior agency leads. And they started talking about how Indiana could really have an impact, not just with policing, right? That's a very small piece of an overarching theme of issues around equity, but with healthcare, looking at infant mortality rates and maternal mortality rates, and looking at pay equity in the workforce and how we are moving women and people of color through our workforce and education. And as they started to have those conversations, he and his task force came up with the idea of creating a position for the state of Indiana devoted to equity, inclusion, and opportunity. And so that's how the position came about. I give all kudos to Governor Holcomb for having the wherewithal to say, this is something that we as a state need to do. And I will tell you, I'm doing some benchmark reports right now. There are about 26 states who are looking at similar type positions or have similar roles, but there are really only 4 other states who have a position that's devoted to this work like we do, and it's a cabinet level position reporting to the governor. There are really only 3 or 4 others, and I'm meeting with some of those leaders right now, but he is just ahead of the game. He's innovative. He knows that the conversations are deeper than just the things that impact him as a white man, and I couldn't be more thrilled to join this team that has so much thoughtfulness around these topics.
Wow, that is really surprising. I had no idea that we were one of four. I mean,
Yes.
wow.
Yes.
If people want to turn on their cameras, of course, that you can, so Karrah can see you guys when we're talking. That's more than okay now. So let's speak about Indiana. You did talk about the overall stats about how women are paid less than men, and I believe that was more on a national level.
Correct. Correct.
Is there any benchmarking or studies about how Indiana by itself compares?
So there are some disparity studies that I just learned 2 weeks ago that are some people from our team with workforce development are looking at women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and how they're getting contracts across the state. And then there are some reports around employment and unemployment and education that they're going to be sharing with me soon. So as I start to have these conversations, I'll be able to have of course, we can address the national numbers, but I'll be able to specifically talk about those numbers with Indiana. I should have that information in the next couple of weeks, which I'm really excited to dig into to see what initiatives we can put in place. But the gap exists in Indiana, trust me, it's there, it's bad. I just want the specific numbers so that I can see exactly what we're up against so that we can start to think about those initiatives.
Well, we know that you're only a couple weeks into this new position. So we really want to have you back, in about like 6 months to see.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So are you following governor's initiatives on what he wants from this office, or do you have some of your own ideas and initiatives? And what if they don't align together? What happens?
That's an excellent question. And so, yes, I work for the governor. He is my boss. And so what he tells me he wants me to focus on, I am absolutely going to focus on. And his agenda for 2021 was released not too long ago. And he's talking about a real focus on workforce and education, which is something that is absolutely top of mind for me. Public safety, so policing, and there's some conversations around body cameras for Indiana State Police. And then he's also talking very heavily about healthcare. And so interestingly enough, a lot of what I have researched over the years, when you start to look at the disparities with healthcare and the access to healthcare, is there's a lot of disparities when it comes to race and still some disparities in particular when it comes to maternal mortality rates and infant mortality rates. And so those things are already on his radar. That very much aligns with me. I am obsessed with the pay equity gap. I think it is absolutely ridiculous and atrocious that we're still dealing with that in 2021. And so I was very excited to see that workforce and education were at the top of his list, because that's at the top of my list, to really dig into the journey from K through 12 into if people decide to go into higher education or if they jump right into the workforce with some type of training or certification, looking at that journey in terms of race and gender, ethnicity, and even socioeconomic status, and what that means, and getting to the root causes of why this pay equity gap exists in Indiana. We can treat the symptoms all day long by giving a promotion to a woman here and a woman there, elevating the position of a woman here, a woman there. But until we actually get to the root causes of why we're still dealing with this in 2021, we're not going to see any substantive change. And so I think he and I are on the same page when it comes to that, because he really wants to look at the workforce and the education and see where we're losing there. And I will tell you, this really plays into the racial wealth gap that we see in this country that is really, it's growing by the day. And so those are all things that are near and dear to my heart that line up underneath those initiatives that he's already set out.
Oh, that is really interesting. So I know you have this book, and by no means is Karrah here trying to sell her book. So I just want you to know
that I'm not allowed to do that.
No, you're not allowed. But she did send us a copy, and Stephanie was kind enough to let me read it too. But I do have a question from this, because I thought it was really insightful. So you say in your book that you can jump from organization to organization, searching for the perfect culture, or you can roll up your sleeves and do the work to create a better culture right where you're at.
Yes.
How do you even start to do that?
Oh my gosh, it is a challenge. It is a lot. And don't get me wrong, there are times when you do have to remove yourself from a culture and you have to go somewhere else, because the challenges are so great that you're not going to be able to overcome those challenges. But for the most part, when we try to jump around, we're going to just find that you jump from the frying pan into the fire sometimes when you do that. And so what I found was the purposeful connection was a huge piece of that. So at the University of Notre Dame, when I was there, Notre Dame is an a fantastic institution, but it's not unlike any other organization that has challenges when it comes to looking at how promoting women and people of color and whatnot. So we started what's called employee resource groups. And in those employee resource groups, we just started to connect with people that had similar interests as us. And we started to talk about these issues. And when we did that, we found that there were more than just the individual, that, more than just one person dealing with it. There were groups of us that were dealing with it. And we learned how to use our voice to go to leadership and say, this is what we need for our international employee population. This is what we need for our veterans who are working here, individuals with disability. We need more, a better process around accommodations. And so as we started to advocate by connecting with one another, it made the organization pay attention and start to really create some initiatives around that. And so I say it's, if you're in a smaller organization, find opportunities to sit down and have a conversation with your CEO or your CFO or the person who's over your human resources team or the person who started the business. Have those conversations. You gotta find your voice and how to do that. And that's why connecting with other women or other leaders who've been there is really important, because they can help you figure out how to navigate those spaces. But I really believe when you figure out how to use your voice, when you use it, people will listen. And sometimes things will change for the better. And sometimes after you've tried to do that and it hasn't changed, that's when you say, okay, I gave it all I had. It's time to move on to a new opportunity.
There we go. All right, so I'm going to read a question here from Karen Bishop Morris. Hi, Karen. So of course, Karen said, thank you, and you're obviously wonderful, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, thank you.
But her question is, what can you share to help leaders conceptualize the relationship between diversity and excellence? I know she has good questions.
It's an excellent question. The relationship between diversity and excellence. So I'm a firm believer, because I struggled a lot, like early on in my career with the university, just trying to figure out where I could have these conversations around diversity and convince people that they were relevant, right? And so I'm a firm believer that when you as an organization or even as an individual are able to perform at the highest levels of excellence, and Notre Dame is a place that did things in excellence. The governor's office is a place they do things in excellence. When you do things in excellence, you enhance that by diversifying the voices at the table. We are in 2021. The United States looks very different than it did 50 years ago. And it's going to continue to look different in terms of the diversity that's coming into play. And so when you have diversity at the table, it creates varying perspectives that now you have the opportunity to connect your organization with demographics that maybe you didn't connect your organization with before. And when you do that, you do it in excellence. And here's what I mean. If you have an organization that you're looking to reach out to the Latinx community or people of color, or you're looking to reach out to more women, but you have no women or Latinx people or people of color at the table, when you start to have those conversations, sometimes there's probably going to be something missing because you don't have the true perspective of what that community needs. Now you can get on Google and you can research, you can look up stuff and see, but when you have voices that represent all of the various subsections of our community, individuals with disability, veterans, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, there's a broadening perspective that it brings to your organization that allows you to create, to operate in excellence. You have no choice but to, because now you know that what you're seeking to do as far as expand the reach of your organization, you're doing it in a way that is actually true to the populations that you're trying to serve. And so diversity helps you get there. It really does. And I tell people this all the time. We did a lot of research on this at the University of Notre Dame. Your bottom line can be impacted in a very positive way, because some people are like, oh, it's all about the money. It's the numbers, the statistics, and how we're doing with our operating budgets and what we're bringing in. That all can have a very positive effect on your bottom line when you reach out to perspectives that are different than your own. And so the two, I think you can marry them beautifully, and you will see organizations operate at a higher level when they do that.
Oh, thank you. We're gonna have just a couple more questions here, but one that I have. So you're a new mom.
I am.
Yeah, a boy or a girl?
I had a little boy. His name is Bryce.
Oh, hey, Bryce. So you're a new mom. You've got this new position that I am certain that your boss has high expectations for.
Very high.
You're also, I see on the back of your book that you're an ordained pastor, a spiritual advisor, a global motivational speaker. I don't even know how you do it all. But being a spiritual advisor, I think really kind of leads me into this next question, because in your book, once again, and she's not selling her book, but I read it, that you talk about the introspection as a first step that you must take on our journey if we want to be, be able to fully fulfill our destiny.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what that really means?
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer, and this is not to get preachy on anybody, but there's a verse in the Bible, Romans 8:28, and we know that all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose and plan for their life. And I'm a firm believer in divine purpose. I really believe that each one of us was put on this earth, whether you believe that we were put on this earth by God or a different entity or some scientific way, we've been put on this earth to fulfill a purpose. And I think that as an individual, you get to a point in your career where you have to figure out, am I walking in what I was created to do, or am I just going through the motions? If I'm just going through the motions, what's the point, right? And so the saying that the two greatest days in a person's life is the day they were born and then the day they find out why they were born. And I really believe that. And there was a point in time where I came to an understanding and a realization that I was put on this earth to advocate for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. And that's just what I've been born to do. When I was younger, I thought I was going to be, because I did like theater and musicals. I'm a big theater geek, was always in the musicals and whatnot. I thought I was going to go to New York and be on Broadway or go to Hollywood and be on a film and whatever. That's not what God put me on this earth to do. He put me on this earth to advocate for individuals that can't yet advocate for themselves. And there was a point in my career where I figured that out. And I said, you know what? Okay, this is what I've been created to do. This is what I'm going to put my energy to. And I will tell you that when I made that decision to just kind of do what I know God told me to do, everything changed for the better. I was really struggling with where I was in my career, and I felt like I wasn't really having the impact that I could have. And I started to do this introspection, and I started to pray. That was my method. Some people meditate. Some people, they do various yoga exercises. Whatever makes sense for you, you have to have that time alone to really figure out what is it that I need to do. And I do this every morning. I pray and read scriptures, but it was a pattern of doing that. And I will tell you, I don't know that I would have gotten to this place where I was offered this position to join Governor Holcomb's team if I hadn't really gotten to take that time of introspection to figure out what it is that I was called to do and figure out how to navigate that. And every day that I come in here to the state capitol to advocate for women, to advocate for veterans, to advocate for individuals with disabilities, to advocate for Black people and Latinx people and whoever else needs to be advocated for, doesn't feel like work. I feel like I'm walking into just another day of exciting, purposeful movement. It does not feel like work. When you really figure out what you were created to do, it won't feel like work. And this doesn't feel like work to me. And that's how I got there, was through that introspection and some career coaching. I had some career coaches I mentioned in the book that really helped me through some of that. But that purposeful introspection is a huge, huge part of it. And you won't always get it right. You'll take some different pathways, and sometimes it doesn't feel like you're supposed to be there, but you'll figure it out eventually. And that is what truly has happened for me in this most recent season of my life.
Oh, that's wonderful. So before everyone else got on, you and I just had a quick conversation about you're down there in Indianapolis and we're up here in Northwest Indiana.
Right.
And so often, at least this is how I feel, and I do believe that there's a couple others on here that feel the same way. We from Northwest Indiana sometimes feel isolated, or a stepchild, we'll call ourselves, from Marion County, from the rest of Indiana. And, we want to bridge that gap, that, that we are one great state. How are you going to outreach to other, to reach out to the entire state to make us feel that we're all included?
So this is one step, right? Whenever I'm asked, as much as I can, and obviously my calendar is quickly filling up with a lot of meetings, and I have to do the job. There's initiatives I'm working on, but as much as I can, if there are events that you all have that I can be a part of so that I can learn from you, what are the challenges in Northwest Indiana? And I was sharing with Andrea that the same conversations were being had with people from Southern Indiana, that they often feel very left out because they're so close to Kentucky, or people like really far east who are closer to Ohio and whatnot. And so it's important to me that I connect with organizations like this, but it's also important to me that if you all you want to reach out to me, there's a way to contact the governor's office and ask for, Karrah Herring and say, these are some of the issues that our region is grappling with healthcare or with education. I actually recently invited the Urban League of Northwest Indiana. They reached out to us, and I've invited them here to the State House for a meeting so that I can understand what are the initiatives that they're working on. Barbara Bowling from the NAACP, she's the Indiana NAACP State Chapter President. She reached out to me. I have invited her here with her executive team to the State House to sit down with me and the Governor's Chief of Staff so that we can hear what are the issues that are important to the NAACP, what's important to the Urban League. If there are women's groups who have issues that are important to them, reach out to me. I will invite you here so that we can have a conversation, introductory meeting to learn what those challenges are. And so while I can't always think, top of mind every single city that I need to reach out to, if you all contact us and you put something on in front of us, I'm going to take the initiative to act on that and take that information and think about that as we start to build out our themes and initiatives that we'll be focusing on over the course of the next couple of years. So please, when I say that, I mean it. I'm not someone who's like, oh, reach out. No, they've reached out, and I'm bringing them here so that we can sit down and talk about what we need to be focusing on for our state. I actually recently connected to someone from Gary. She's in Mayor Prince's office. I think she's new to his team, but she's looking at like minority business contracting. And she is actually a fellow Purdue grad. She reached out to me. We had a Zoom meeting, and now with all these virtual ways to meet, there's no excuse not to meet with someone. You can jump on Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever. And so I've connected with them, and I want to see how we can partner with Gary and other cities. So yes, please reach out to us.
Well, then, I'm going to do this on behalf of Lisa, who is our committee chair for our awards banquet. Karrah, on September 30th, we have our 10th annual Influential Women of Northwest Indiana Awards Banquet, and we bring together 800 people, men and women, to celebrate the achievements and recognize influential women and up-and-coming women. And, we would really like to have support and representation from our great state.
Yeah.
So, whether, we would love to have you come up and, and do the welcome and, and to your guest of honor. And, if you can bring that governor along with you too, I mean, we'll let him come. Okay.
Yes, we'll let him come. Yes.
We'll let him come. But you know what, and we love the Zoom and we'll take the Zoom, but we are really craving some attention from the great state.
Yes.
And so, as much as we can ask from you, and we want you to ask us, we want to be at the table with you as well. Yes. So, please include us. And once again, it's that two-way street. So, in reaching out and connecting with everyone.
Absolutely.
So with that, do you have any last great words of wisdom for us?
Oh my gosh. The only other thing I'll say, and you jokingly said, I don't know how you do it all. I always find that whenever you have a lot on your plate, and women, we just do because we wear so many different hats, something is going to fall behind in your life. There's some area that's not going to quite be what you want it to be. And my only advice is to just be gracious with yourselves. I don't think we give ourselves enough grace as women to say that we're trying our best I have, our newborn, but I also have 2 teenagers. I have a bonus son. When I got married, I got a son that I had not had before, and he's 16. And then I have a daughter, she's 15. I had her when I was 22 years old. And so I have this big gap with my teenagers and my baby, and I'm away from my family right now during the week because I'm down at the State House working, and I'm home on the weekends, and I have a place here in Indianapolis. But I can't be there as much as I want to be there, but it's just a small sacrifice in my mind to make for a bigger picture. And they all agree to this. They're all supporting me and rooting me on. And I would just say, as women, we have to make sacrifices sometimes, and it's okay. Be gracious with yourself. We won't always get it right. And sometimes it requires a bit of challenge for the people around us, our families who love us, but it's okay. It's all for a bigger purpose. And so be gracious, be kind to yourself, and find a day like once a month to just focus on you. Please, we got to do it so that we can be good for what we got to do. So that's my last piece of advice.
Well, Karrah, we're going to be rooting for you. And I do think that we all need to give grace in each other's lives and give forgiveness and
Yes.
support one another. So we want to thank you. We want to keep you involved with NEWA.
Yes.
For the rest of us, and here it goes right into what you said at the very beginning, one of our next events is Lieutenant or Governor Suzanne Crouch. on March 10th. And we are super excited to have her. And even though virtual is not how many of us want to meet, it is allowing us to be able to have Karrah here and bring in the Lieutenant Governor. So she's going to be on for March 10th. So if you want to, register so you can participate. We're just really excited to have her. And she's going to be moderated. She's part of our Breaking the Glass Ceiling. And so Karen and Lori will be moderating that program for her. Our next empowerment series is Push Through. And we're going to have the authors here talking about Push Through, and they're going to give a hands-on program with their journal and everything else. So we're real excited. Once again, this is not a sale about selling the book, but these women are coming together to show us how to push through your ultimate success playbook. So, we're going to get together. We're going to actually do some worksheets together on that, and that is on March 24th. So we're super excited. You can register online at niwa.org. So with that, you're going to have our closing slide. Don't hang up, because you're going to have we're going to get you the survey right away. It'll take you like 5 seconds to do, but we want you to be involved with NIWA. Reach out to us, get involved in a committee, join a committee. Reach out to each other, and let's empower us to be the success that we can be here. So thank you, Karrah. Thank you to my education committee for helping put this on. We really appreciate it. So with that, we're signing off. Thank you, everyone.